Go ahead, make my day.
Greetings. Welcome to This, That, and the Other, where I react to, respond to, comment on, question, or otherwise propound on whatever I find of interest on any given day. Now, today's topic From Frogmorton, the travelers trotted on, and as the sun began to sink, they came to Bywater by its wide pool, and there they had their first really painful shock. This was Frodo and Sam's own country, and they found out now that they cared about it more than any other place in the world. The area in and around Bywater was a total shamble. The familiar houses and hobbit holes were gone. The gardens were overgrown with weeds. And looking with dismay up the road towards Bag End, they saw a tall chimney of brick in the distance. It was pouring out black smoke into the evening air. Sam was beside himself. "I'm going right on, Mr. Frodo," he cried. "I'm going to see what's up. I want to find my gaffer." Merry stopped him. "We ought to first find what we're in for, Sam," he said. "I guess that the chief will have a gang of ruffians handy. We'd better find someone who will tell us how things are around here." But there was no one. When they reached the Green Dragon, they were disturbed to see a half-dozen large, ill-favored men lounging against the inn wall. The ruffians had clubs in their hands and horns on their belts. "Where do you think you're going?" said one, the largest and most evil-looking of the crew. "And where are those precious sheriffs?" "Oh, coming along nicely," said Mary. "A little footsore, perhaps. We promised to wait here for them." "Garn! What did I say?" said the ruffian to his mates. "I told Sharkey it was no good trusting those little fools. Some of our chaps ought to have been sent." "And what difference would that have made?" said Mary. "We are not used to footpads in this country, but we know how to deal with them." "Footpads, eh?" said the man. "So that's your tone. Sharkey's come now, and your boss will do what Sharkey says." "And what may that be?" said Frodo quietly. "This country wants waking up and setting to rights," said the ruffian, "and Sharkey's going to do it, and make it hard if you drive him to it." "Oh, indeed. I am glad to hear of your plans," said Frodo. "I am on my way to call on Mr. Lotho, and he may be interested to hear of them, too." The ruffian laughed. "Lotho? He knows all right. Don't you worry. He'll do what Sharkey says, because if a boss gives trouble, we can change him, see?" "Yes, I see," said Frodo. "For one thing, I see that you're behind the times and the news here." He informs them that Mordor and Isengard have fallen and Saruman is a beggar in the wilderness. "I passed him on the road. The king's messengers will ride up the Greenway now, not bullies from Isengard." The man stared at him and smiled. "A beggar in the wilderness," he mocked. "Oh, is he indeed? Swagger it, my little cockawhoop. But that won't stop us living in this fat little country where you've lazed long enough, and king's messengers, that's for them. He snapped his fingers in Frodo's face. "When I see one, I'll take notice, perhaps." This was too much for Pippin. "I am a messenger of the king," he said. "You are speaking to the king's friend, and one of the most renowned in all of the lands of the West." His sword glinted. Merry and Sam drew their swords also and rode up to support Pippin. The ruffians gave back. Scaring Breland peasants and bullying bewildered hobbits had been their work. Fearless hobbits with bright swords and grim faces were a great surprise. And there was a note in the voices of these newcomers that they had not heard before. "Go," said Merry. "If you trouble this village again, you will regret it." The three hobbits came on, and then the ruffians turned and fled, running up the Hobbiton road, but they blew their horns as they ran. "Well, we've come back none too soon," said Merry. "Not a day too soon. Perhaps too late, at any rate, to save Lotho," said Frodo. "Miserable fool, but I'm sorry for him." "Save Lotho? Whatever do you mean?" said Pippin. Pippin doesn't seem to quite grasp the situation. Sure, Lotho is evil, but he never meant things to come to this pass. But since Sharky came along, he's trapped in a prison of his own making. Pippin said, "Of all the ends to our journey, that is the very last I should have thought of. To have to fight half-orcs and ruffians in the Shire itself, to rescue Lotho Pimple." Frodo recoils at the word fight. He's turned super pacifist and wants no violence of any kind, if at all possible. Merry somewhat chastises him, saying, "You won't rescue Lotho or the Shire just by being shocked and sad, my dear Frodo." Regardless, strategic discussions begin. The hobbits realize they are only 4. The ruffians are calling up reserves. Pippin wants to take cover overnight. Sam wants to call on Farmer Cotton to help organize the uprising, since he's the most respected person in the area. Merry says it's no good taking cover. They need to act, and act now. They must raise the Shire. He says Sam can go to Cotton's and get things going there. Merry took the horn given to him by Eowyn, and a sudden clear horn call went up, ringing into the sky. Then Merry changed the note, and up went the horn cry of Buckland, shaking the air. "Awake! Awake! Fear! Fire! Foes! Awake! Fire! Foes! Awake!" Same as back in Buckland when the Black Riders invaded a year ago. Sam rode on. When he got to the lane's end, there was Farmer Cotton and 3 of his lads. Sam identified himself. Farmer Cotton came up close and stared at him in the twilight. "Well," he exclaimed, "you've been in foreign parts, seemingly. We feared you was dead." "That I ain't," said Sam. "Nor Mr. Frodo. He's here with his friends. And that's the to-do. They're raising the Shire." "Good! Good!" cried Farmer Cotton. "So it's begun at last. I've been itching for some trouble all this year, but folks wouldn't help. Come on now, lads. Bywater is up. We must be in it." Farmer Cotton and a few of his lads head for the village. Sam delays briefly to check on Mrs. Cotton and especially Rosie. "They're fine. Urge him on." When Sam got back, he found the whole village roused. More than 100 sturdy hobbits were assembled with axes and heavy hammers and long knives and a few hunting bows. More were still coming in from outlying farms. Some of the village folk had lit a large fire just to enliven things, because it was one of the things forbidden by the chief. The bonfire burned bright. Mary had the villagers setting up barriers across the road. When the sheriffs came up, they were dumbfounded. But as soon as they saw how things were, most of them took off their feathers and joined in the revolt. Sam found Frodo and his friends by the fire talking to old Tom Cotton, while an admiring crowd of Bywater folks stood around and stared. Frodo and Farmer Cotton discuss what to do next. Frodo wants to know how many ruffians there are, where they are, and what kind of weapons do they have. Well, Cotton gives him all the information he has. They're scattered around the Shire, but probably aren't more than maybe 300 of them all told. The hobbits can handle them if they're organized and stick together. They're mainly armed with knives and clubs, but some bows. Oh, they've shot one or two of our folk, said Cotton. There you are, Frodo, said Merry. I knew we should have to fight. They started the killing. Well, not exactly. It seems the Tooks actually drew first blood. Paladin Took, Pippin's father and the head of the Took clan, was thoroughly annoyed by Lotho all along. He said that if anyone was going to play the chief at this time of day, it would be the rightful Thane of the Shire. No prizes for guessing who that was. The Took family lived in a complex of deep holes called the Great Smiles, and the ruffians can't get them. They won't let the ruffians come on their land either. If they do, the Tooks hunt them. Tooks shot 3 for prowling and robbing. They keep a pretty close watch now. No one gets in nor out of it. Pippin cheered his family and stated emphatically that someone was going to get in now. He headed off to the Smiles with a half-dozen others, promising to bring back, quote, an army of Tooks in the morning, unquote. Merry blew a horn call after them as they rode off into the gathering night. The people cheered. Frodo reiterates, no killing. Not even of the ruffians, except to protect hobbits. Merry accepted that, but expected a visit from the Hobbiton gang at any time, and they won't come just to talk. The hobbits will need to be prepared for the worst. He said he had a plan.
Don't worry, Mr. B. I have a cunning plan to solve the problem.
Some hobbits came running in. They reported a band of ruffians was approaching, more than 20 of them, although 2 of them ran off westward. Farmer Cotton thought it would be to get more of them from Waymead, about 15 miles away, so that's not an immediate problem. Merry hurried off to give orders. Farmer Cotton cleared the street, sending anyone unarmed indoors. Soon they could hear loud voices and the tramping of heavy feet. A whole squad of the ruffians came down the road. They laughed at the barrier. There wasn't anything in this little land that can stand up to 20 of their kind, they thought. The hobbits opened the barrier and stood aside. The men sarcastically thanked them, then threatened to take them to the lock holes if they didn't go home. They marched along the street, shouting. They didn't notice the hobbits closing in behind. Farmer Cotton stood all alone by the fire. "What do you think you're doing?" sneered the ruffian leader. Farmer Cotton looked at him slowly. "I was going to ask you that," he said. The leader told his men to take him to the lock holes. The men took one step forward and stopped short. The roar of voices all around them. And suddenly they were aware that Farmer Cotton was not alone. They were surrounded. Nearly 200 armed hobbits had crept up out of the shadows. Mary stepped forward. "We've met before, and I warned you not to come back. I warn you again. You are standing in the light, and you are covered by archers. If you lay a finger on this farmer, or anyone else, you will be shot at once. Lay down your weapons." The leader looked around. He was trapped, but that should be easy to break out. The long knife in his left hand and a club in the other, he made a rush at the ring. He aimed a savage blow at Mary and fell dead with 4 arrows in him. That was enough for the others. They gave in. They were roped together and marched off to an empty hut. They were tied hand and foot and locked up under guard. The dead leader was dragged off and buried. Cotton said, "I said we could master them. We just needed a call. You came back in the nick of time, Mr. Mary." "There's more to be done still," said Mary. "We haven't dealt with 1/10 of them yet." Now, Mary wants to wait until morning and visit the chief. Sam's a bit restless and says they ought to do it now. He really wants to get back to Hobbiton and see his gaffer. Cotton assures Sam that his father's all right, that the Cottons help him out when they can. All against the rules, of course. Sam thanks him, but insists that he still wants to see him. Cotton says to choose a companion or two and go fetch him over to Cotton's farm. This might be a good place to explain the word gaffer. Sam uses it a lot. Today, of course, a gaffer is the chief electrician on a film set. In the past, the term was used more generally to mean a supervisor of any group of workers. And before that, it just meant an old man. And presumably, that's what most supervisors were. Sam uses the term for his father. Even when I was in high school, it was common to refer to one's father as my old man. Not to his face, of course. Sam went off. Mary arranged for lookouts around the village and guards at the barriers during the night. Then he and Frodo went off with Farmer Cotton. They sat with the family in the warm kitchen, and the Cottons asked a few polite questions about their travels, but hardly listened to the answers. They were far more concerned with events in the Shire. Farmer Cotton related the happenings of the last year. Lotho, widely known as Pimple, started getting the idea that he should own everything and order others around. Now, he already did own a lot more than most people thought, but his source of cash was a mystery. He started with a lot of property in South Farthing, which he had from his dad, and it seemed he'd been selling a lot of the best leaf and sending it away quietly for a year or two. But in the end of last year, he began sending away loads of stuff, and not only leaf. Remember foreshadowing? A lot of men came with great wagons, some that carry off the goods south, but others to stay. Things began to get short. Folk began to get angry. Lotho has an answer. More men! Soon they were planted all over the Shire, felling trees, building sheds, and pushing people around. There was a bit of trouble. Old Will, the mayor, set off for Bag End to protest, but he never got there. He's been locked in a hole at Nickel Delving ever since. Pimple started calling himself Chief Sheriff, or just Chief. He did what he wanted, and nobody else was allowed to do anything. If anyone locked it up, they went to the lockholes. Everything except rules got shorter and shorter. There was no pipeweed, no beer, and the inns were all closed. The men started going around gathering stuff up for fair distribution, which meant they got it and the hobbits didn't. except for the leavings, which you could have at the sheriff houses if you could stomach them. All very bad. But since Sharky came, it's been plain ruination. Mary asked the obvious. Who is Sharky? Apparently, the worst of the lot. The name first circulated about a year ago. No one has seen him, but he's shown up now and back at Bag End, and he's the real chief now. The men do what he says, and what he says is mainly hack, burn, and ruin. If they want to make the Shire into a desert, they're going the right way about it. You know, they even took Pimple's mother, Lobelia, and he was fond of her, if no one else was, and dragged her off into the lock holes. This is about the most convenient place to break, but we're not done. There's still more of the original story that needs to be covered. So until we meet again, thanks for watching. Check some of the other episodes. You know, these work better if they're viewed in sequence. Do all the comment, like, subscribe stuff. Or better yet, buy me a coffee.